That was the moment I knew exactly what my daughter and her husband had been planning all along. I am 79 years old. My name is Catherine, and I have lived in the same house in Oakville, Ontario, for 41 years. My late husband Bernard bought that house the year our daughter was born. We painted every room ourselves. We planted the maple tree in the backyard that now stretches so tall it shades the entire porch in summer. Bernard passed 8 years ago, quietly in his sleep, the way he always said he hoped to go. After he died, the house became the only thing that still smelled like him, like cedar and pipe tobacco and something I could never quite name. I was not about to give that up for anyone. My daughter's name is Sylvie. She is 52 years old and she lives in Mississauga with her husband, a man named Gordon who sells commercial real estate and has, for as long as I have known him, talked about property the way other men talk about hockey scores. I never disliked Gordon. I simply never fully trusted him either. There is a difference, and most women my age understand it instinctively. Things started to shift after I had my hip replaced 2 winters ago. The surgery went fine. My doctor at Halton Healthcare said I healed remarkably well for my age, but Sylvie began calling more after that. Every few days at first, then every day. The calls were gentle, caring even. She asked if I was eating properly. She asked about the snow on the driveway and whether I had someone to shovel. She asked very casually whether I had thought about what my future might look like. I told her my future looked like a cup of tea on my own porch in the morning, same as it always had. She laughed, but the calls kept coming. In the spring, Sylvie and Gordon drove out to Oakville for dinner. I made roast chicken the way Bernard used to love it, with lemon and rosemary, and we sat at the dining room table I have had since 1987. Gordon spent most of the meal looking around the room in a way I recognized, not admiring, assessing. He commented on the neighborhood. He mentioned that houses on my street had been selling well. He said, and I remember this exactly because I wrote it down afterward in the small notebook I keep by my bed, he said, "A place like this, Catherine, in this market, you could be sitting on close to 1.4 million. I told him I was aware of what my house was worth. I had owned it for 4 decades. He smiled and said he was just saying. By July, Sylvie raised the idea of a retirement residence, not a nursing home, she was careful to say, a retirement community. She had found one in Burlington. Very nice, she said, a newer building with a dining room and a fitness center and organized activities. She said it might be good for me to be around people my own age. I reminded her that I had friends. I had my book club, which I had attended every 3rd Thursday for 19 years. I had my neighbor Patricia across the street, who was 74, and walked with me every morning when the weather allowed. I was not lonely. I was simply old, which is not the same thing. But Sylvie was persistent. That was always her nature, even as a child. She wore things down quietly, the way water shapes stone. Over the following weeks, she mentioned it again and again, always framed as concern. She said she worried when the roads iced over. She said she worried about me falling alone in the house. She said Gordon's mother had transitioned beautifully into a similar residence in Oakville and was so much happier now. I began to feel, though I could not have told you exactly why, that I was being moved towards something. Then in September, Sylvie mentioned that the Burlington residence had a suite available for a short-term stay. A trial period, 2 weeks, just to see how I felt. She said it was common. Lots of people did it before committing to anything. No pressure, just to give it a chance. I do not know why I agreed. I have thought about this many times since. I think I was tired of the worry in her voice. I think part of me wanted to prove to her, and perhaps to myself, that I was not afraid. I packed a suitcase. I watered my plants and asked Patricia to check on the house. I locked my own front door and climbed into Sylvie's car. I did not know it would be 6 weeks before I came home. The residence was called Lakeview Gardens, though there was no lake visible from any window I could find. It was clean and the staff were pleasant enough, and the dining room smelled of soup and floor cleaner in equal measure. My suite had a single window that looked onto a parking lot, and a television mounted on the wall that I did not know how to operate. Sylvie carried in my bag and showed me where things were, and hugged me and said she would call in the morning. When I reached for my phone to call Patricia that first evening, it was not in my purse. I checked the side pocket, the main compartment, the small zippered section where I always keep it. Nothing. I assumed I had left it on the seat of Sylvie's car. I went to the front desk and asked to use the telephone there. The young woman at the desk, her name tag said Amber, told me that residents were not permitted to use the reception phone for personal calls. She said it was policy. She said I could ask my family to bring my mobile. I called Sylvie from Amber's desk anyway, while Amber was briefly occupied with something else. Sylvie answered and I told her I thought I had left my phone in the car. There was a pause. She said she would look. She said she would drop it off soon. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday it had not arrived. When I asked the administrator, a woman named Brenda, not the Brenda from the list. This was a different woman entirely, a woman with a lanyard and reading glasses on a beaded chain. When I asked her about making calls, she explained very warmly that the residents had a policy about personal devices during the adjustment period. 2 weeks, she said, to help residents settle in without distraction. I asked her who had agreed to that policy on my behalf. She looked at her computer screen and said that my emergency contact had indicated it was preferred. My emergency contact was Sylvie. I sat with that for a long time that evening. I sat in my suite and looked at the parking lot, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that I had not come here for a trial. I had been moved here, and something was being done to my house while I sat in this room that smelled of other people's dinners. I was not confused. I was not having any kind of episode, no matter what anyone might later suggest. I was simply an old woman who had made the mistake of trusting the wrong person, and now I was thinking very carefully about what to do next. The following morning I walked down to breakfast at 7:30, earlier than most residents, and I sat near a woman at the end of the table who introduced herself as Harriet. I know, Harriet is on the list, but this is what the woman told me her name was, so I am telling you. The point is not her name. The point is that she had been at Lakeview Gardens for 4 months, and she was quite clear-eyed about how things worked there. She told me, between spoonfuls of oatmeal, that the front desk phone was available before 7 in the morning when the overnight staff were rotating shifts and the new day staff had not yet fully settled in. I filed that away. On Friday morning, I woke at 6:15. I dressed carefully. I wore my good blue cardigan and the pearl earrings Bernard gave me on our 30th anniversary, because I have always believed that how you present yourself affects how seriously people take you. I walked down the hall and through the common room, and I stood at the front desk, and I asked the overnight staff member, a young man who looked barely awake, if I could use the phone. He said sure, in the distracted way of someone whose shift is almost over. I called my lawyer. His name is Franklin. I have been his client for over 20 years, since he helped Bernard and me update our wills after our son moved to Calgary. Franklin is semi-retired now, but he still keeps morning hours at his firm in Oakville, and I knew he would be in by 7:30. His assistant picked up. I asked her to have Franklin call me back at this number within the hour because it was urgent, and I was not in a position to receive calls. Franklin called back in 20 minutes. I told him everything. I told him about the trial period that had stretched into weeks. I told him about my phone. I told him about the policy that Sylvie had apparently authorized. And then I told him the part I had not let myself fully think about yet, that 2 days earlier a woman at breakfast had mentioned, in passing, that she had heard the staff saying a family member had been in to collect some of my documents from the front desk. Personal papers, they were called. I had not authorized that either. Franklin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Catherine, do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. I am going to make some calls this morning." He asked if I was safe. I told him I was perfectly safe. I was simply in Burlington against my own better judgment. He told me he would be in touch before noon. I thanked the young man at the desk, whose name I learned was Tyler, and I walked back to my suite and I sat on my bed, and I felt, for the first time in weeks, like myself. What Franklin discovered in the following 48 hours was worse than I had imagined, though perhaps not worse than I had suspected. Gordon had arranged for the house to be listed, not openly, not through a public MLS listing, I checked later, but through a private arrangement with a buyer he knew through his commercial contacts. The sale was structured to close quickly, under the table as much as such things can be, with a price low enough to move fast and high enough to look legitimate. The plan, as best as Franklin and I understood it, was that by the time I realized what had happened, it would already be done. To make it happen, Gordon had needed power of attorney over my affairs. He had needed my signature. He had obtained it, or thought he had, during a visit to Lakeview Gardens the previous week, when he had brought me a card and some fruit from Costco and stayed for 40 minutes. He had shown me several papers and explained them as residency paperwork, long forms, small print. He had a pen ready. I had signed 2 things and initialed a third. I remembered that visit. I had thought the paperwork seemed like a lot for a 2-week trial, but Gordon had said it was standard, and I had been tired that day, and I had signed. This was the part that frightened me most. Not that he had tried it, that I had let it happen. But Franklin looked at what Gordon had filed, and he found the problems immediately. The power of attorney document did not meet Ontario's legal requirements. Under the Substitute Decisions Act, a continuing power of attorney for property requires a specific certificate of independent legal advice, a certificate confirming that the person signing understands what they are signing and is doing so voluntarily, without pressure. There was no such certificate. There was no witness who qualified under the Act. The form Gordon had used was a template he appeared to have downloaded, not a properly executed legal instrument. In other words, it was not valid. Franklin contacted the real estate lawyer Gordon had engaged for the property transfer. He made clear that no valid power of attorney existed, that the seller, me, had not provided informed consent, and that proceeding with the transaction would expose all parties to significant legal liability. The sale stopped. Then Franklin came to Lakeview Gardens himself. He drove out on a Wednesday morning and sat with me in the common room and explained everything clearly and in the right order, the way he has always done. He told me what Gordon had attempted and what had failed, and what our options were going forward. He had already contacted Adult Protective Services through the Ontario government, as he was required to do when financial abuse of an older adult was suspected. He had also spoken with a colleague who handled family law and estate litigation. I listened to all of it. Then I asked him one question. I asked, "Can I go home today?" He said, "Yes, you can go home right now." I packed my bag in 11 minutes. I have never packed so quickly in my life. I left the half-finished crossword puzzle on the nightstand. I left the cardigan I had hung on the back of the chair. I did not stop at the front desk to formally sign out, because Franklin told me I had never been legally admitted in any binding sense, and no one at Lakeview Gardens attempted to stop us. We walked out through the lobby, past the dining room, where the lunch staff were just beginning to set tables, and out through the front doors into a cold October afternoon, and I got into Franklin's car, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 6 weeks. My house was exactly as I had left it. Patricia had kept an eye on it just as I had asked. The maple tree had dropped most of its leaves, and they were thick on the back lawn, deep orange and rust-colored, and I stood on my porch for a long time, just breathing the smell of autumn and my own garden. I changed the locks the next morning. Franklin's office handled the legal notifications to Gordon and Sylvie. I will not go into the details of everything that followed, because some of it is still being sorted through the courts. But I will tell you that what Gordon did, attempting to fraudulently execute a power of attorney and arrange the sale of property belonging to a person who had not provided valid consent, is not a small matter under Canadian law. The Substitute Decisions Act, the criminal code provisions around fraud, the elder financial abuse provisions that the Ontario government has been strengthening in recent years. There are consequences, real ones. The kind that cannot be explained away as a misunderstanding. Sylvie called me 3 weeks after I came home. I let her leave a voicemail. She said she had not known the extent of what Gordon had been arranging. She said she had genuinely thought the residence would be good for me. She said she was sorry. I have not called her back. I do not know yet if I will. That is a decision for another season, and I am in no hurry. What I know is that I am 79 years old, and I have lived in this house for 41 years, and the maple tree in my backyard is already showing the first green of spring. And Patricia and I have resumed our morning walks, and my book club met last Thursday, as it always does. I handle my own banking. I manage my own mail. I review my own statements every month, the way Bernard and I always did together, sitting at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper. My mind is sharp, my judgment is sound, and if there is one thing I want anyone listening to this to understand, it is that age alone does not make a person vulnerable. Being isolated does. Being made to feel like a burden does. Being slowly, quietly convinced that someone else should be making decisions about your life, that is where it begins. Do not let it begin. Talk to your friends, keep your own lawyer, keep your own bank account, read what you sign, and if something feels wrong, if the calls get a little too frequent, if the concern sounds a little too rehearsed, if a cup of tea at your own table in the morning starts to feel like something that needs to be justified, trust that feeling. Trust yourself. I called my lawyer from the reception desk at 6:30 in the morning in a borrowed cardigan and Bernard's pearl earrings, and I saved my own home. If I could do it, so can you. Now, I would love to know, have you or someone you love ever been made to feel that others knew better than you about your own life? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, please tap the like button. It helps more people find us here. I will see you in the next one, my dears. I think about that Friday morning often. The blue cardigan. Bernard's pearl earrings. The overnight staff member who barely looked up when I asked to use the phone. Such a small moment. Such an ordinary desk. And yet that was where everything turned. What Gordon tried to do was not complicated, it was just patient. He waited until I had a hip replacement. He waited until I was tired. He waited until the calls from my daughter had softened me enough that I climbed into a car with a suitcase and locked my own front door behind me. He understood something that took me longer to see, that the most effective way to take something from a person is not to grab it, but to make them doubt whether they ever really needed it in the first place. That is the part I want to sit with, because I think it matters. The actions Gordon took had consequences not because the universe punished him, but because what he built was hollow. A power of attorney with no proper witness, a sale arranged without valid consent. Every shortcut he took to move faster left a crack, and Franklin found every one of them. The plan collapsed under its own weight. That is not luck. That is what happens when something is constructed on dishonesty. It cannot hold. And I think about what held me together through those 6 weeks. It was not courage in the dramatic sense. I was frightened. I was angry. Some nights I sat by that parking lot window and felt something very close to despair. But I kept thinking clearly. I kept noticing things, the timing of the shift changes, the way Amber looked away when I asked about the phone, the fact that Gordon's visit with the paperwork had been just a little too casual, a little too rehearsed. I had spent 41 years managing a household, raising a daughter, handling finances with Bernard, reading every document we ever signed together on Sunday mornings at the kitchen table. That practice, that habit of paying attention, did not leave me just because I was 79 and in a strange room. I want to say that plainly, because I think it gets forgotten. Staying mentally engaged with your own life is not a luxury. It is a form of protection. The moment you hand over the thinking to someone else, the bills, the statements, the legal documents, you create a space that someone unscrupulous can step into. Not always, not inevitably. But the risk is real, and I have lived it. And then there is Sylvie. I have not called her back. I may eventually, but what I keep returning to is not the anger. Though the anger was real, it is the sadness of recognizing that she chose to believe what was convenient rather than what was right. She told herself a story in which moving me to Burlington was kindness, and she told it so many times she stopped questioning it. That is its own kind of failure, not of intelligence, of honesty, with herself and with me. What I know now, sitting on this porch with the maple coming into leaf again, is that the life I have is mine because I refuse to let someone else narrate it for me. I called Franklin. I wore the pearl earrings. I walked out through the front doors, and I came home. That is enough. That has always been enough.